In the cold between the stars, there is no sound when worlds die. The void is a black ocean, vast and indifferent, disturbed only by the slow, relentless passage of mankind's greatest weapons. Vast warships slide through the darkness like drifting cathedrals, hulls the size of continents prowling on silent engines, their flanks bristling with rows upon rows of gun decks. On the auspex, the enemy is just a scatter of runes. In reality, they are murderous suns in motion, closing the distance with all the implacable fury of a coming storm. On the command deck of an Imperial battleship, stained glass hololiths flicker in the half-dark, projectors crawling with incense smoke. Red lumen strips pulse to the beat of alarm klaxons as the ship's machine spirit howls its warnings. Hooded tech priests chant binharic litanies to coax another spark of power into void shields already burning like caged aurora. The void around the ship erupts in silent fury as incandescent energies flare across kilometers-wide barrier fields. Each impact a prayer answered. For now. Below decks, the reality of war is much less grand. On the gun decks, ratings sprint through choking fumes, bodies slick with sweat and machine oil, hands raw from cranking shell elevators and ramming charges into macro cannon breaches the size of hab blocks. Sirens shriek, vox horns bark orders, and the overseer's shock staves crackle as they drive the gun crews to inhuman pace. Brass shell casings crash and tumble in great heaps, rolling across plates, rattling with the recoil of broadside after broadside. Servitors, limbless things encased in crude iron, hang from their hard-wired stations and intone firing litanies in flat, broken voices as they track targeting augers and slam rune seals down on fire commands. Macro cannon belch their wrath into the void, hurling solid kilometers-long curtains of steel and promethium, shells arcing across the black in paths no human eye will ever see. Lance batteries carve needle-straight beams of sun-hot light through enemy hulls, slicing decks, crew, and reactor lines with surgical brutality. Torpedo tubes slam open like the maws of predators, spitting out spear-headed engines of doom that vanish into the dark, closing silently on the heat signatures of distant foes. There are no screams in the void, only icons winking out on tactical screens as ships die, and the muffled tremor of distant detonations transmitted through metal bones. In the hangar bays, under flickering lumen strips and groaning bulkheads, pilots of Fury interceptors and Starhawk bombers sit strapped into their craft, reciting catechisms as ground crew bolt on warheads and purity seals. Massive launch doors grind open to reveal nothing but a yawning star-scattered black. Catapult fields flare, and in a heartbeat, the pilots are hurled from the relative safety of the hangar into the killing field between fleets, where a moment of hesitation is the difference between a burning, spinning death and a triumphant return to a bay that will already be prepping them for the next sortie. Through it all, the command throne remains at the center of the storm. A captain sits rigid under the glow of tactical hololiths, eyes red from sleepless hours, greatcoat heavy with rank insignia and wax-dripped purity seals. Around them, voidmasters, auspex officers, masters of ordnance, and choir masters bark out ranges, velocities, shield integrities, casualty reports, warp eddy readings, and 100 other vital metrics in a rapid-fire litany of doom. Orders are given in a voice that cannot afford to tremble. All ahead full. Bring us across their T. Batteries, fire at will. Helm, hold the line. By order of the Navis Imperialis, no retreat for the Emperor. This is Void War in the age of the Imperium. No mercy, no respite, only the grinding exchange of blows until one side is reduced to tumbling wreckage and frozen corpses. And the men and women who wage it do so aboard the greatest fleet mankind has ever known. They are the Navis Imperialis, the Imperial Navy, the steel wall in space. They hold the void so that the Imperium can exist at all. Without them, the Emperor's realm would fracture into 1,000,000 isolated worlds ripe for slaughter. It was not always called the Imperial Navy. In the golden days of the Great Crusade, before treachery tore the galaxy apart, the fleets that bore the Eagle of Terra were part of a single, sprawling war machine, the Exertus Imperialis, the Imperial Army. Its void arm was the Imperialis Armada, a colossal network of battle groups and expeditionary fleets that carried the Legiones Astartes, regiments of proto-guard, and the will of the Emperor from one star to the next. These fleets were the arteries of conquest, binding humanity back together after the long darkness of old night. Yet even then, the seeds of disaster were in their hulls. When the War Master Horus turned against his father, half the Armada Imperialis followed him into damnation. Entire fleets declared for the traitors, seizing the void lanes, cutting off loyalist worlds, and turning the guns of their warships against the very Imperium they had once built. Planets deemed loyal were bombarded into radioactive slag. Star forts changed hands in brutal boarding actions. Astropathic relay stations and supply convoys vanished into burning ruin. The Horus Heresy proved a cruel lesson. When one man commands both void and ground, his rebellion can cut an empire's veins in a heartbeat. After the heresy, in an age of ashes called the Time of Rebirth, Rabute Gilliman enforced sweeping reforms. No longer would any single warlord control both the ships that rule the stars and the armies that tread the soil. The Imperial Army was broken apart. Its fleets became a separate, jealous, rival service, the Navis Imperialis. Its ground forces became the Astra Militarum, bound to Navy transports, but never again united under one banner and one command structure. What had once been the Imperialis Armada became a carefully compartmentalized system of battlefleets, with overlapping jurisdictions and rigid chains of authority, deliberately designed to make future galaxy-spanning mutinies harder to ignite. From that division arose the modern Imperial Navy, a vast web of war fleets, patrol flotillas, convoy escorts, system defense forces, and fortress fleets, all tasked with the same relentless mandate: patrol, escort, blockade, annihilate. Every battle fleet of the Imperial Navy exists not just to win battles, but to maintain a permanent presence in the cold dark, to hold the shipping routes, to enforce imperial will and taxation, and to make sure that when the Emperor's armies go to war, they arrive with their boots on dry ground and the skies already under their guns. The men and women of the Navy live with a simple truth: the void is always trying to kill them. A hull breach, a misjump, a flare of radiation from a hostile star, a microscopic fragment of debris hitting at relativistic velocity, a warp storm blooming like a malignant flower. All of these can end tens of thousands of lives before any enemy ever fires a shot. That knowledge breeds a particular mindset, iron discipline wrapped around bone-deep fatalism. Ratings joke about dying in the silence between heartbeats. Officers sleep in their uniforms, ready to be called to stations at any hour. Commanders learn early that hesitation in the void is paid for in entire ship's companies. Superstition thrives in such circumstances. Every warp transit is preceded by incense-laden processions along the spine of the ship, priests splashing sanctified oils across bulkheads, while crewmen touch Aquila charms and mutter half-remembered litanies of protection. Void-faring crews are notorious for their rituals, knocking on certain bulkheads before shift, refusing to speak the word safe in the run-up to translation, painting crude warding sigils near their bunk rows. Gunners will refuse to stand to a weapon that has not been properly anointed. Damage control teams carry small reliquaries they refuse to part with, even in firestorms. In a place where a single blown seal can vent you into eternity, even the most hardened atheist quickly learns to whisper a prayer. Doctrine, however, is not built on fear. The Admiralty understands that Void War is not just a clash of guns, but of logistics and patience. The first task of the Imperial Navy is to secure orbital supremacy, control of the high ground from which bombardment, deployment, and interdiction can be conducted. The second is to deliver and support planetary forces, the regiments of the Astra Militarum, the killing machines of the Adeptus Astartes, the engines of the Adeptus Mechanicus. The third is to maintain the arteries of the Imperium's life, convoys, pilgrim transports, grain haulers, Prometheum tankers, troop carriers, and the endless shuttle of tithe ships that bleed worlds to feed Terra. Battles are often won or lost months before the first salvo, on a chart table scattered with star maps and warp route projections, in the decision to escort one convoy and leave another to fend for itself. Visually, the Imperial Navy is unmistakable. Its ships are Gothic nightmares of iron and adamantium, kilometer upon kilometer of armored hull, layered with the architectural language of shrines and fortress monasteries. Their prows are razored rams, carved with the double-headed Aquila, flanked by vigil lanterns and studded with ramming spurs. Spires rise from their dorsal hulls like the towers of hive cities, uprooted and hurled into the void, each spire bristling with antennae, auspex domes, and macro batteries behind armored shutters. Statues of saints and martyrs loom from housings above the main gun decks, their stone faces contorted in perpetual benediction over the storm of fire below. Each battlefleet bears its own colors and heraldry. Battlefleet Solar might paint its prows the deep red of Mars, or the stark white of Terra's authority. Battlefleet Gothic's hulls are stained by the radiation of the Eye of Terror, their banners heavy with the sigils of beleaguered fortress worlds. Segmentum Tempestus fleets may carry the storm iconography of Baccha, while those of Ultima Segmentum bear the sigils of distant Kar Duniash. But whatever splashes of color and sector markings they wear, Every Navy hull ultimately fights under the same symbol, the Imperial Aquila, wings spread wide across their adamantine flanks, a reminder that each ship is both fortress and shrine. Within, the officers look almost delicate beside the brutal architecture of their ships. They wear dark greatcoats trimmed with gold and sealed with purity wax, peaked caps rigid with authority, high-collared dress uniforms adorned sparingly with medals, because to carry every honor earned in a lifetime of void war would weigh them down like chainmail. On formal occasions, their uniforms are immaculate. In combat, the same coats are often stained with oil, ash, and the blood of bridge crew struck down at their posts. The crew beneath them are another world entirely. Ratings, bondsmen, and pressed souls of 1,000 worlds stalk the corridors in stained void suits and flak vests, heavy labor harnesses cutting into their shoulders, rebreathers hanging at the ready against smoke leaks and atmosphere failures. Many are hive scum scooped up in tithes. Others are void-born, whose families have served aboard the same ship for generations, never feeling unfiltered planetary gravity in their lives. Penal conscripts serve in the most hazardous roles, their sentences commuted only by death in the Emperor's service. Servitors, those lobotomized remnants of criminals and debtors, haunt the maintenance ducts, hardwired into the ship's functions, chanting in flat tones as their mechanized limbs adjust, patch, and recalibrate the arteries of the great machine. The Navy has no single home world. Its heart is scattered across the galaxy in fortress anchors and dockyard labyrinths. Above Terra, the naval headquarters coordinates much of the fleet's bureaucracy, while the segmenti majoris are each served by their own primary fortress. Mars for Segmentum Solar, Hydrafor, Cypra Mundi, Bacca, and Car Duniash serving Pacificus, Obscurus, Tempestus, and Ultima, respectively. Around these bastions orbit miles-deep shipyards, ring stations, and defense platforms, all devoted to berthing, arming, and repairing the war fleets of the Imperium. Some of these bases are legends in their own right. Cypra Mundi, a forge world and fleet capital, is a crucible of Imperial naval doctrine and production, its orbital docks home to the construction of mighty battle cruisers and battleships that will serve for millennia. Port Ma, an artificial world of Xenos origin turned into an Imperial fortress harbor, broods near the Eye of Terror, its vast docking caverns housing reserve squadrons and star forts of Battlefleet Gothic, forever on a war footing against the storms that vomit chaos fleets into real space. Above Holy Terra, the ringed dockyards and star forts are so dense they form a kind of iron halo, a crown of steel about the throne world. Feeding all of this is an administrative nightmare that would drive lesser civilizations to collapse. The Adeptus Administratum calculates fuel quotas, ammunition allocations, crew replacements, and refit schedules with glacial, agonizing precision. The Departamento Munitorum, forever overstretched, assigns transports and escorts to an endless queue of requested deployments, trying to balance the demands of 10,000 war zones against the hard limits of hulls, crews, and propellant. Entire subsectors' economies exist purely to forge macro-cannon shells and torpedoes, to spin armor plating and auspex arrays, to mine the promethium that burns in 1,000,000 plasma drives. Amid that machine of steel and ink, each ship remains a church unto itself. Chapels line the main thoroughfares, from modest shrines where ratings light tallow candles to grand sanctuaries on the command deck level, their altars constructed from relic plating taken from the hulls of defeated enemies. Reliquary niches punctuate corridor walls, holding the finger bones of void saints, shrapnel from legendary battles, or fragments of banners blessed on Terra itself. Navy chaplains and ministorum priests oversee these floating cathedrals, leading Mass before dangerous warp transits, conducting funerary rites for those whose bodies can be recovered, and reciting the Litany of the Void before doors are sealed for battle. Above it all sits a hierarchy as vast and cold as the stars themselves. The Imperial Navy is ultimately commanded by the Lord High Admiral of the Imperial Navy, often a High Lord of Terra, who speaks for the fleets upon the Senatorum Imperialis. Below them, 5 Segmentum Lord High Admirals command the battlefleets of each galactic segmentum, their writ extending over thousands of sectors and countless ships. Each segmentum fleet then fractures downwards into sector battlefleets: Battlefleet Solar, Battlefleet Cadia, Battlefleet Gothic, and many more, each responsible for a swath of star systems with their own admirals, staff, and internal politics. Emperor-class battleships as fleet flagships and fighter carriers. Lunar-class cruisers as dependable line workhorses. Dauntless-class light cruisers as agile hunters and flankers. Cobra and Sword-class escorts as convoy guards and torpedo wolves. The bureaucracy that binds them is rigid, but in the lonely span between stars, individual captains wield godlike authority. In the void, cut off from instantaneous communication, a single captain's order can doom or save entire worlds. Compared to the Astra Militarum's regimental independence and the Adeptus Astartes' quasi-feudal autonomy, the Navy is hyper-centralized, its chains of command carefully layered to limit rogue admirals' power. Yet even so, the reality of warp delays and information lag means that at the moment of decision, a ship's master is often alone. Vox messages can take weeks to cross a war zone. Astropathic signals are garbled, incomplete, or lost to the tides of the warp. By the time orders from a distant sector admiral arrive, the battle for which they were intended has already been fought and lost or won in fire. Crew for these leviathans are drawn from across the Imperium. Hive worlds provide a steady tithe of bodies, men and women who grew up in cramped, polluted underhives, whose transition to the cramped, polluted holds of a void ship is almost seamless. Frontier worlds, civilized planets, and even agri-worlds supply conscripts and volunteers, drawn by the promise of pay, rations, and escape from their homeworld's grind. Entire populations are subject to press gangs when quotas fall short. Hab districts and underdecks swept clean of undesirables to fill the bondsman ranks of a newly commissioned cruiser. Penal colonies empty out their most promising inmates into penal crews and armsmen cadres, their shackles replaced with shock collars and shotguns. Officers follow a different path. Many are drawn from noble families whose scions attend naval academies on key worlds and segmentum capitals, sons and daughters of admirals and planetary governors, educated in navigation, gunnery, fleet tactics, and the art of surviving the politics of the Admiralty. Others rise from the Schola Progenium, or from void-born lineages that produced prodigies of the helm or the auspex. A few claw their way up from the ranks, ratings who survive enough battles, display enough ruthless competence, and learn the language of orders and reports well enough that someone pins a junior officer's badge on their collar and tells them to start giving the orders instead of just obeying them. Training is brutal and unending. Cadets learn to march in perfect synchrony along the hall inside sealed void suits, trusting their mag boots when the gravity cuts out. Ratings drill emergency damage control procedures until they can slap on patch foam and sealant in the dark with one hand. Gunnery crews practice loading shells into macro cannon with blindfolds, racing the clock and the overseer's lash. Simulated warp breaches, hull fires, and boarding actions are sprung without warning. Those who freeze or fail are reassigned to the most dangerous stations, or simply left behind at the next port. Indoctrination in the Imperial Creed runs parallel to all this, because a crew that lacks faith will break long before the hull does. For many, a Navy posting is both a death sentence and a promotion. A hive-ganger who would have died anonymously in the sump sludge now dies anonymously in the void, but at least they do so in the Emperor's service, and with the faint chance, vanishingly small, of surviving long enough to see a second deployment. A noble scion might find that their family name means little when a shell punches through the bridge armor and decompresses the command deck. The void does not care for pedigree. Aboard each ship, key roles knit the great engine together. At the pinnacle is the ship's captain, master of the vessel, whose word is absolute law within the hull. Below them, admirals command multiple ships, riding in their flagships and directing squadron maneuvers. But on any given deck, it is the captain's voice that sends men to their deaths. Voidmasters oversee navigation and helm, coaxing ancient plasma drives and clumsy mass into elegant arcs around gravity wells and debris fields. Masters of ordnance command the ship's guns, calculating firing solutions across light seconds of distance, timing broadsides to catch enemies at their most exposed. Auspex officers and sensorium crews sift through a storm of data, trying to distinguish real contacts from ghosts and sensor echoes. Communications officers juggle vox traffic and astropathic fragments, transforming half-deciphered transmissions into something resembling a coherent tactical picture. Armsmen, the ship's internal soldiery, patrol the corridors, break up brawls, stand ready to repel boarders, and execute mutineers. Naval armsmen units are equipped and trained like shipboard shock troops, shotguns and carapace armor for close quarters fighting in rusting corridors, breaching gear for cutting through sealed hatches, and a reputation for ruthlessness that keeps the crew wary. In the launch bays and the slender spires of flight control, pilots of attack craft play their own savage game. Fury interceptors dogfight among drifting wreckage, weaving through exploding debris while the flickering arcs of point defense fire claw at their wings. Starhawk bomber wings scream in low over enemy ships, launching torpedoes and gravitic charges before slamming their engines to full burn to outrun the shock waves of their own weaponry. Many never return, their names added to long lists carved onto bulkheads, their helmets wired into shrines as relics of courage. Alongside the Navy's own personnel, each ship depends on a host of allied specialists. Navigators of the Navis Nobilitae, mutant-eyed figures shrouded in silks and wards, sit in their private chambers and gaze into the warp, guiding ships between stars by the dim psychic beacon of the Astronomicon. Astropaths of the Adeptus Astra Telepathica form choirs, souls burned and blinded by their bond to the Emperor, screaming messages through the Imperium in rituals that are equal parts communication and agony. Adeptus Mechanicus tech priests oversee the machine spirits of the engines and weapon systems, coaxing and threatening them into cooperation. More caretakers of temperamental gods than mechanics. Some ships themselves are relics, holy objects in their own right. Ancient battleships whose keels were laid in the shipyards of Mars or Cypra Mundi in forgotten millennia bear layer upon layer of battle honors and refits. Emperor-class flagships that served a dozen admirals survived 100 wars and have been torn apart and rebuilt so many times that only a sliver of their original hull remains, still prowl the void. The ship's very name can become a battle cry, shouted by crews who know they are part of a story older than their bloodlines. Even individual weapon systems can be venerated. A macro battery that fired the final volley in a decisive battle might be named and blessed, its crew considered privileged among ratings. A lance array that has burned the sigils of the Imperial Aquila into the hulls of a dozen heretic cruisers might be adorned with purity seals by the ship's chaplain, its void-shielded housings transformed into miniature shrines. Figureheads carved into prows, saints, angels, winged Aquilas, are anointed before each engagement, the oils mingling with the burn-scarred metal beneath. Command thrones inherit their own legends. This is where the admiral sat when he ordered the ramming maneuver that saved a world. These are the armrests that still bear the blood splatter from an assassin's bullet. Through such engines of war strode the great figures of naval history. Lord Admiral Cornelius von Ravensburg, commander of a great battle fleet in the Gothic War, weathered a storm of war amid chaos armadas, elder raiders, and traitor human pirates. With a fleet battered on all fronts, he orchestrated the defense of a sector cut off from the wider Imperium, choosing when to stand and when to feint, culminating in desperate engagements that turned the tide and denied the despoiler full control of his coveted superweapons. In later centuries, admirals like Quarren of Battlefleet Cadia carved their names into legend at the very mouth of the Eye of Terror. When a black crusade broke upon the Cadian Gate and the fabric of reality itself began to tear, the Void War became a maelstrom. Quarren's battered fleets fought rearguard actions against overwhelming chaos armadas, covering refugee convoys and reinforcement flotillas. His skillful defense of the space lanes, coordinating shattered squadrons, system defenses, and whatever allies he could piece together, was said to be all that stood between entire subsectors and total annihilation. He ultimately died at his post, his flagship consumed in the fury of battle. but his name is still invoked by naval officers who pray for such clarity of command under impossible pressure. For every loyal hero, there are traitors and pirates who haunt the Navy's nightmares. Rogue admirals who have turned their ships to chaos, carving petty warlord realms along disrupted warp routes. Renegade captains who fled into the fringes with their crews and hulls, selling their guns to the highest bidder, their ships scarred with unholy sigils. Against such foes, the Navy fights not only for territory, but for the soul of its own calling, to prove that duty outweighs ambition, that the only rightful master of a void ship bearing the Aquila is the Emperor and those who serve in his name. Across 10,000 years, wars in the void have shaped the fate of worlds. In the Gothic War, the Navy fought a conflict waged almost entirely in space, as heretic forces and the Imperium struggled over control of ancient, apocalyptic star fortresses capable of shattering worlds. Planets burned, but the deciding blows were struck by fleets maneuvering through warp storms, ambushing convoys, and launching desperate assaults on enemy-held fortresses. At the Cadian Gate, through 13 Black Crusades, battlefleets faced the endless procession of chaos armadas surging from the Eye of Terror. The fall of Cadia itself was not just a ground war, but a void catastrophe. Defenses overwhelmed, orbital platforms annihilated, traitor battleships hammering the planet until even its bedrock screamed and splintered. Every guardsman who fought on the surface did so under a sky lit by the dying flares of Navy ships dying by the squadron. The Navy has faced Xenos threats of every kind. Against orcs, brutal green-skin cruisers and kill cruisers crash headlong into Imperial lines, forcing admirals to calculate whether they can blunt the charge before ramming impacts tear their ships open. Against Eldari corsairs, fleets fight ghosts, chasing phantoms through nebulae, while enemy ships flicker in and out of reality, striking and vanishing before full broadsides can be brought to bear. Tyrannid hive fleets present yet another nightmare. Organic void creatures that think nothing like human admirals, whose bioships swarm around Imperial battle lines, spitting corrosive spores and living torpedoes, forcing Navy crews to fight enemies that bleed acid instead of atmosphere. Tau fleets, sleek and technologically advanced, batter Imperial formations at range with coordinated missile salvos and precise fire, turning engagements into duels of doctrine, brute endurance versus cold efficiency. In each case, the fate of entire worlds below hung on lines plotted in the void above. A hive world might be saved because an escort squadron caught and destroyed a Tyrannid vanguard flotilla before it could begin orbital bombardment. An aggro world might burn because an admiral misread the enemy's feint and left one flank uncovered. From orbit, extermination campaigns are conducted. Lance strikes into manufactoria, cyclonic torpedoes slamming into crust, atmosphere torn away in storms of liquid flame. The Navy is both shield and sword, and when ordered, executioner. Now, in the era of the Great Rift and the Indomitus Crusade, the Navy stands more strained than ever before. The galaxy is split by a vast, roiling wound in reality, the cicatrix maledictum, that divides the Imperium into the Imperium Sanctus and the Imperium Nihilus. On one side, Terra and its attendant fortress fleets cling to a semblance of coordination. On the other, countless worlds lie in darkness, cut off from the Astronomican's guiding light, their local fleets isolated, their commanders forced to wage independent wars with whatever resources they have left. Warp routes, once considered stable, have become death traps, their tides warped by demonic fury. Astropathic links burn out, messages arriving years late or never at all. Convoys vanish into hungry storms. Battle fleets find themselves translated not where they planned, but light years off course, emerging into systems already overrun by demons, orcs, or worse. In the Imperium Nihilus, small flotillas of Navy ships, sometimes under the ad hoc command of Space Marine chapters or Inquisitors, act as local guardians for entire regions with no hope of reinforcement from the wider Imperium. And yet, even in this age of nightmare, the forges have not gone cold. New ships are laid down in the cavernous docks of Mars, Cipramundi, Baca, and 100 lesser yards. Old hulls are dragged back from dereliction, cleaned of Xenos fungus and heretic sigils, and recommissioned under new names, or sometimes under the same name, because symbols matter, and the sight of a long-thought-lost battleship leading a relief fleet can rekindle morale across an entire campaign. Forced recruiters scour the underhives and penal legions. Training academies accelerate their courses, turning out junior officers in half the usual time, and trusting that battle will finish their education, or kill them. The Indomitus Crusade itself is as much a naval operation as it is a ground one. Multi-fleet armadas, arranged like claws of steel, each tow a battle group with its own admirals and subcommands pushing through hostile space to relieve besieged worlds. Gilliman's strategy rests on the ability of the Navy to keep such staggering concentrations of power supplied and moving, to thread armadas through the ragged edges of the Great Rift, and to arrive in time to matter. Without the Navy, even a legion of Primaris Space Marines is just a legend told on worlds they will never reach. For every triumphant arrival, there are fleets that never make it. Some wander, lost in the warp, emerging decades or centuries after they departed, finding that the worlds they meant to save are long dead or held by enemies they barely recognize. Others are never heard from again. Somewhere in the interstellar dark, their hulks drift, lights long since guttered out, crew frozen where they died at their stations, still strapped in, still holding the controls as if awaiting the next order. This is the tragedy and the terror of the Imperial Navy. Its casualty lists are measured in ships lost, not just souls. Entire crews die unrecorded, bodies unrecoverable, no graves but the cold in which they fall. A guardsman might at least leave a corpse on a battlefield where a memorial stone could be raised. A rating slain by decompression vanishes into vacuum, their name one more line etched on a bulkhead plaque, if anyone even knew their real name to begin with. And yet, despite the anonymity of their deaths, the men and women of the Navy keep going to stations when the alarms sound. They strap into launch couches, they haul shells into breaches, they stand at their posts on the command deck and watch the enemy icons close. They recite litanies to machine spirits and to the distant, unseen emperor. They obey the orders that will kill them, because if they do not, there will be no fleets to guard the void. And if there are no fleets, there is no Imperium. The Imperium is an interstellar empire, and empires exist through movement of troops, of tithes, of faith, of fear. The Imperial Navy is the means by which that movement takes place. It owns the void, or at least contests it, at a cost paid in hulls and lives beyond any sane accounting. It is terrifying in its scale, inspiring in its endurance, and tragic in its utter expendability. Admirals are remembered in histories. Whole crews are remembered only in the moment their loss appears as a red mark on a star chart. Picture again the opening scene. Two fleets sliding toward one another in the dark. Void shields flare like overlapping auroras. Macro cannon thunder in silent fury. Lance beams burn hard white scars across enemy hulls. Bombers weave through flak and debris, torpedoes streaking like pale, vengeful comets. Somewhere in that chaos, a ship with its engines down, shields failing, and decks ablaze gets the order no one wants to hear. Ramming speed. Officers exchange glances, then nod. Priests begin the last rites. Crewmen clutch their aquillas. The engines burn hot one last time. The prow angles toward the enemy's gutted flank. As the distance ticks down, the captain's voice rings over the Vox, calm and unwavering. All hands, for the Emperor. There is a moment of perfect, terrible clarity. Then steel meets steel, and in the heart of the explosion, a single truth endures. So long as there are such crews, such ships, and such sacrifices, the Navis Imperialis will hold the darkness at bay for one more day.